Right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of Eastern Area Planning. I'm Councillor Graham Pass, Chairman of the committee. Other members of the committee present are Councillors Bridgman, McKinnon, Stewart, Longton, Mays, Somner, Woodhams, and Councillor Hunt is attending remotely via Zoom. He'll be able to ask questions and take part in the debate, but will not be eligible to take part in any of the voting this evening according to the Council's rules. But I could ask him, or will ask him, for an indicative vote to see how he would vote if he were here. I have the following officers in attendance to advise and support the meeting: Bob Dray, Team Leader in Development Control; Kim Marr, our solicitor, to keep me on the straight and narrow more than anything; and Jess Bayliss in Democratic Services, who is on Zoom. I'm also assisted by Gordon Oliver and Lizzie Reeves, who will be the Zoom hosts for the meeting. Now, before we start proceedings, I'd like to explain, really for the members of the public who may be watching, that tonight's meeting is being held both over Zoom with councillors present in a COVID-compliant council chamber, and I can confirm that those present in the chamber are sitting socially distanced and are thus permitted to remove their face masks while seated. Now, people making representations and making a presentation to committee are encouraged to do so remotely by Zoom, but can attend, and we have two attending in person. When it comes to your time, gentlemen, there is a dais there with a microphone and an on button. As those who are attending on Zoom, you would have up to 5 minutes to make your case and remain in that position to answer any questions that members may have. I will give you further guidance as we go along. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow our proceedings. Now, do members have any questions about the way in which this meeting will be conducted before we proceed? I would ask, in that we're in a Zoom environment, that when you do wish to speak, if you could indicate with your Zoom hand, it helps me enormously trying to keep the correct order of those asking questions. Right, for item 1, apologies. Do we have any apologies, please?
Yes, Chairman. So we've had apologies from Councillor Alan Law, with Councillor Joe Stewart attending as substitute. Councillor Tony Linden has given us apologies, with Councillor Graham Bridgman attending as substitute. And we've had apologies from Councillor Alan Macrow, with Councillor Nasser Hunt attending as substitute. Thank
you, Jess. All right, members, minutes of the meeting held 25th of August 2021. May I ask if you're willing to accept these minutes as a true and accurate record? A show of hands by this. Oh, Zoom hand. Oh, very impressive, Councillor Bridgman. Thank you very much. I'm very happy for others just to indicate if they are happy by hands.
Chairman, it's a Zoom hand to raise a question.
Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor Bridgman. Please ask your question.
Chairman, minor point, but Councillor Law, whilst he is chairman of 2 committees, he's not chairman of this committee. Correct. And we have 2 chairmen at the head of the minutes.
Well spotted. We will delete one. Otherwise, may I sign these minutes, please?
No, it's not seconded, whichever is appropriate.
Thank you. All happy? Yes. Right. Right.
Chairman, were we having a vote on that? Because the vote, I've got 2 votes yes, and nobody else has voted.
No one dissented. Can I confirm, please, by a show of physical hands, if you are happy that I have signed the minutes? Thank you. Those of you who were here, and yes, thank you very much, Councillor Bridgman. Thank you. Members, declarations of interest. I'm going to start by saying, on item 2, I do know the applicant. I know the main objector. They're not exactly personal friends. I know them because they're residents of Bucklebury, where I live, and I'd consider it not to be a personal interest. Sorry, a personal interest as opposed to any prejudicial one. But I think it should be noted that that is the case. Does anyone else have any declarations of interest, please? No? Without further ado, then, I'm going to ask Mr. Dray to introduce the first item, which is item number 21-01390, the Old Travellers' Rest, Hungerford Lane, Bradfield South End. Mr. Dray, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just share my screen. There we go. Okay, members, the first application before you tonight is a Section 73A application, which is seeking to retrospectively vary the approved plans of a previously approved scheme. Application 20-00852 House granted planning permission for a series of works at this property, the Old Travellers' Rest. That included the demolition of 3 timber outbuildings, the construction of a replacement timber carport and garage, and 2 single-story extensions to the rear of the building, single-story side extension, and various other alterations, including replacement windows. The Section 73A application before you tonight relates solely to the outbuilding with that scheme and the design changes relating to that. So the application is before you because of the ward member calling it in, and it's been recommended for conditional approval. So just waiting for the screen to change. Okay, so here's the application site, the Old Travellers' Rest, on the corner at the top of Hungerford Lane, a short distance out of Bradfield South End. It's been a bit slow, sorry. There we go, it's better. Sorry, apologies for that. So there's a plan just showing the constraints. It's in the open countryside because it's not in a settlement boundary. Therefore, our housing in the countryside policies apply. It's also within the North Wessex Downs AONB, which is not shown on there because it basically washes over the whole site. You can see public footpaths indicated by the green various dashed forms of dashed line, a little bit away from the site, and some TPO trees opposite, but not materially affected by this scheme. So this is the approved plan for a copy of the approved plan for the outbuilding from the original scheme. Although we have marked it up in this case with annotations, and you've got these two in your update sheet as well. They've been published online in advance of the agenda going to print, but they're there for easy reference. We've got those dimensions on there. As you see, the approved, well, I'll show you the amended plan, and then I'll show you a comparison. So just note that the roof form in this one primarily, and here's the proposed plan introducing half hips and a reconfiguration. This is putting the two alongside each other. So just briefly going through the changes. The approved scheme has gable ends, whereas the proposed scheme has introduced half hips. There are 4 roof lights on the front on both plans. Originally there were 4 roof lights to the rear, but now there are just 2. The window has switched to the opposite side elevation. So the window as proposed here and as built is on the side facing away from the house, whereas the doors move from the outside to the side facing the house. Internally, the carport and the garage and the store, it's all flipped round so that the carport is at the opposite end and the upstairs storage remains the same. I'll come on to more details. We do have a complete table of the changes requested on the site visit, which cover the dimensions. I'll turn to in a moment, those design elements I've just mentioned, and the materials, which I'll come to. But first, I'll just show some pictures. So here you can see the house on the right-hand side in the foreground, and then the outbuilding behind it. So that's taken from the junction. From within the site, seeing obviously both the house and the outbuilding. The front elevation. The rear. That's the side facing away from the house. the window is obscured by the tree there, but it's just under the eaves. That's the view looking southeast away from the house. And that's a photo of the cladding. So it's once development ceased on site when this application was requested. So it's currently being constructed with block work, and it's proposed to be finished with the cladding, but obviously it's stopped at the time being. So how it looks at the moment is not the finished article. There's finishing materials to be applied. Some of the main causes for concern have been regarding the scale of the development and some discrepancies in the type of construction and the dimensions between what was approved, what was constructed, and what it appears that it's been applied for in this application. In terms of construction and materials, so there's a schedule set out in your update report on page 2 of the application, comparing what was stated on the approved documents and what is proposed now. The outbuilding was originally described as a timber carport, but it's clearly been constructed of block work. As I said, work's temporarily ceased pending this application, but it's not its final form. It is proposed to clad it so that it would have the outward appearance of a timber clad structure. There would be timber posts going down the centre of that carport to complete the look. Yes, and I've included an email from the agent just clarifying that position in the update report for you. With respect to this change, it's our view as planning officers that, unlike a listed building where obviously the nature of construction is quite important, the internal construction is not material in this instance. And the reason for that is internal alterations do not normally require planning permission. And what we're primarily concerned about is the external appearance. So the focus of our attention has been what the finished article will look like rather than the type of construction per se, whether it's block work behind or timber construction. Moving on to the dimensions and the concerns being raised regarding the accuracy of the plans throughout the process. The planning officers have been out and surveyed the site, taken measurements of what's been built, what's been constructed, and compared it to the plans. And we've done further checks too in comparison since the committee site visit. So the best reference point is again the table in the update report, because there are some very minor tweaks from even what we put in the committee report. And the reason for that is we'd have what the agent would measure versus what we measured on site. And the table there is what we consider to be the best, definitive and sufficient for our purposes in assessing the application tonight. And for the avoidance of doubt, the 2 plans that are attached to the update report normally we just have scale plans which are measured. We've asked them to be annotated so it's absolutely clear what the dimensions are that we're approving. And in the update report, we have proposed revised approved plans condition referring to that plan to make sure that is enforceable. Skimming down the table on the measurements then quickly, you'll see the width has gone from 12.98 to 12.86, which with planning applications and plans, there is a certain small degree of tolerance we can accept when it comes to enforcing, because obviously the precision of a plan and what can physically be built, there is a very small degree that we would say is an acceptable tolerance. And I think for the width and the depth of changes, we'd be within that. The ridge height, as approved and what we've measured, has not changed. The biggest change is in the eaves height. So you've got the measurements there for the lowest eaves and the highest eaves, one going up 10 centimetres, one going up approximately 20 centimetres, which we would judge to be beyond an acceptable tolerance on an approved plan, but which is a change we can consider as part of this application. In terms of design change, it's gone from gables to half hips. So in that respect, given that the overall size is approximately more or less the same, with our view is that there's actually less bulk in that respect. There are the alterations internally to the window and to the door. They're not really material in planning concerns in many respects, but they make more logical sense. But I don't think that has much of a bearing on the application before you. The first floor window is being moved outward facing, so it's no longer looking at the house, but it doesn't directly overlook any neighbours. There are neighbours. I can refer to the plan again if you like, but there's, given the distance, we're content in that respect. That doesn't cause any harmful overlooking. So overall, there are some of the changes are to such a small degree, having checked them on site, that we would say they're in acceptable tolerances, and others that are material deviations we would be content with are acceptable. And we think the half hips reduce the massing slightly. So on that basis, we are recommending approval of the application. The conditions on the report, because it covers all the other works that are permitted on the scheme that aren't being changed, cover all of those things as well. They have to be reiterated. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Dre. And as always, members, make a note, please, of any questions you have for our officers for when those wishing to speak have spoken. They may well indeed answer them. So without further ado, may I welcome Councillor Andrew House of Bradfield Parish Council, who is here. Please come to the dais, Councillor House. And you have, as I'm sure you know, you've been here before, up to 5 minutes to speak. I'll time you. Can I assist you with any timekeeping? There's a button. That's it.
A comment at 4.5 minutes would be admirable, but I don't expect to get that long.
If you're still talking at 4.5, I will advise you.
Okay.
Please remain there after you have spoken for any questions members may have. And your time starts whenever you start talking.
Thank you, Chairman. This application has been brought for the following intervention of the West Berkshire Council Enforcement Team after discrepancies to the original planning permission were noted as construction proceeded. The Parish Council had observed and had been advised from numerous parishioners that the building being constructed didn't match the approved plans in numerous and varied ways. This application seeks to regularise just 3 of the issues raised: the handing of the building, the introduction of the hipped roof, and the removal of the 2 roof lights. Parish Council believes that having the access to the ancillary use element of the outbuilding in the north elevation, nearer to the main dwelling, is a far more sensible position. The loss of the external door to the store does not raise any concerns, neither does the window introduced at first floor level, overlooking the countryside. The hipped roof is welcomed as it reduces the visual bulky appearance, although it does make the building look a little more house-like rather than the outbuilding that it purports to be. The removal of the 2 roof lights purely raises the question of why and what might any future use be. The Parish Council was concerned with the original application in terms of its size and intended use. Being of an oak frame structure, even though it was to be timber-clad, the Parish Council considered it to be in keeping as an outbuilding within the ANOB and not as a base for a new house in the countryside, which, if very much contrary to West Berkshire Council policy. Interestingly, the drawings submitted for this Section 73 application state oak frame structure, but the arrow now points to a single dividing support between the 2 carport bays. The ground floor plan still clearly shows the positioning of the wooden structure supports throughout, and not the as-built, which is fully insulated cavity wall concrete block construction. How can case officers recommend an approval for a Section 73 variation of condition, the approved plans, when the new plan submissions don't actually reflect what has actually been built? The Parish Council note the conditions suggested should planning approval be granted this evening. We are a little confused with condition 1, as drawing 2006-P14A appears twice, but with different title descriptions. Bradford Parish Council would request that condition 4 be amended and extended in line with a number of ancillary incidental use approvals given locally in both Bradfield and an adjoining parish in recent months, and indeed years. The additional sentence to read: the carport garage building shall not be used as a separate dwelling unit, nor shall it be sold, let, rented, or otherwise separately occupied or disposed of, and no separate curtilage shall be created. This addition would mirror other conditional approvals and avoid future change of use challenges because of the clarity of the revised condition 4. In summing up, the applicant appears to have basically disregarded the approved plans and conditions applied and built something similar. The original application was to demolish 3 unsafe timber outbuildings and construct a replacement timber carport. This application doesn't fully reflect what has been physically built. If the councillors are to approve this application this evening, condition 4 must be amended to allay any doubt or confusion of the outbuilding's use. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well under 4 minutes, Councillor House. Members, do you have any questions for the Parish Council? I'm looking at Zoom hands. Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just clarify, because I was interested in the actual construction. You're saying that this is cavity wall construction. So that is what you are saying, that what has been built is cavity wall.
Concrete block cavity wall, fully insulated.
Thank you. Obviously, we'll take that up with the applicant.
Thank you. Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, Councillor House. Can I just pick up on a point you raised there, Councillor House, about the conditions? So it's your position that the proposed extension to condition 4, that the separate dwelling house shouldn't be sold, let, rented, or otherwise separately occupied. That is either the same or very similar to conditions which have been granted elsewhere in Bradfield.
Oh yeah, yes, and also in the adjoining parish of Bucklebury.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Councillor House? I see no other Zoom hands, so thank you.
Thank you.
We have no supporters, no objectors. We do have the applicant, Mr. Behrman. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Again, up to 5 minutes. Can I assist you with any timekeeping? Okay, thank you. But please remain for any questions.
So, hello. I believe the reason the application was called to the committee was simply because of a misunderstanding initially regarding the size of the building that had already been approved. The Bradfield Parish Council stated at the time the height and footprint for the building have increased dramatically, but the planning officers, as we've heard this evening, have been on site to check that, and the states the differences are minor and are considered to be within acceptable tolerances from the construction side. The planning officer also reported that the changes would not be harmful to the character and appearance of the building, the application, and the rural character of the North Wessex Downs area of outstanding natural beauty. In other words, they're not significant changes. The enforcement officer informed us to stop work, and therefore we was unable to complete the building. Had we completed the building, there would have been the feather edge cladding all around. There would also be, which was pre-ordered, the oak posts, which would be left and right of the garage centre with oak braces to match the port, the entrance for the main house, which is the structure is already there. In terms of the concerns that have been raised with the above part of the garage and the construction above the cavity walls is timber, as it would have been if it had been a timber structured building. I used the concrete blocks because I used to be a bricklayer and it's cheaper for me to build in that way. The reason we have the cavity wall is from a structural purpose. We have an RSJ, which is 215 mil wide, to take the structure above. Therefore, I had to use a cavity wall. A 4-inch wall wouldn't have been structurally sound to do so. So it was a saving point exercise. And the agent that submitted the plans for me originally had put the timber structure, and his interpretation from his perspective was the external. So when you look at the building from the outside, it will look no different to had it have been a timber structure. If you have any questions, obviously I'm happy to answer.
Members, any questions? I have Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a question which won't go to the way in which I view the application of my decision, but I think is a question that obviously has to be asked, which is this. You had a planning permission based on very explicit plans for the design of the building. You ignored those plans. Why did you just simply ignore? Why didn't you apply for a fresh planning permission or an amended planning permission before, if you wanted to build something different, before you started construction?
Yeah, sorry.
in all honesty, I relied upon my agent who did the planning. And when we was constructing the building, he provided me the plans to work with in terms of the material construction. When it came to constructing the roof, the carpenters had said to me that the rest of the house was hipped. It would have less of an impact. Would I want that to be hipped? Again, I spoke to my agent. I just, in naivety, they didn't feel that that would have an impact, in that it would reduce the size of the building rather than increase the size of the building. And when it came to mirroring the building, I didn't pay enough attention when the plan was originally submitted that the door that would access the ancillary accommodation was away from the property, and it would have meant we'd had a path all the way around some 16 to 20 metres rather than from my utility room door, which sits now 4 metres or 5 metres away. It just made more sense for us to have the space to utilise that way. And if I'm honest, I didn't realise it was going to cause so much trouble. If I had, I wouldn't have done what I did.
Well, I hear that, and I understand your reasoning. What I don't understand is why you didn't apply for a fresh planning permission. You constructed something for which you did not have planning permission.
Again, I could reiterate that I was reliant upon somebody that works with drawings and plans. Whilst I'm a bricklayer by trade, I haven't done that for quite some time. And I don't normally deal with planning, so I've always relied on an agent. And I contacted the agent about what was being proposed, and he didn't feel that it would cause any issues and I would be okay. In the worst case scenario, we would do what we're doing now. So I took advice from someone I paid for. Similarly, the solicitor in the room, if I paid a solicitor for advice, I'm not a law person. I rely upon the advice I was given. So I hadn't directly made those decisions myself. I did seek advice, but have been given incorrect information. So I didn't set out to break any rules or do anything.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks, Chairman. Like Councillor Bridgman, I've got a couple of questions I'd like to ask you for information purposes, and your answers wouldn't expect to influence the way I'm going to vote on this one. But you mentioned your naivety, you self-described naivety in dealing with the planning process. Have you developed buildings like this before? You're an experienced developer, Mr. Berman.
I'm not a developer, I'm a householder, and I have built extensions and built properties before. The last property I built was in the village, which was a new build at the bottom of the hill, but that was some 6-7 years ago. And prior to that, I did a property that was 5-6 years ago, but nothing like this, if you like, that had any issues with planning. So I've never been before a committee before in my life.
I hope you're not finding us too objectionable at the moment. Also, can I ask, what are you going to use the outbuilding for?
So if the officer showed you the house structure, whilst it's a big house, the upstairs of the property, being some parts of the 1850s or whatever it was built, it's not suitable for storage whatsoever. And we have currently in that garage that's there and in my carport, which the pictures might show, are full of our possessions. So initially we only want it for that. It's just myself and my wife that live there with my son who's at uni at the moment, who will leave away. We don't need any additional accommodation. And for the fear of it being turned into some structure as a house, which is ridiculous, the property, if that was done, I would devalue my net worth considerably, because the house has got a value of 2.25 million as it sits there at the moment. If I split the plot and that was made into another property, I would be out of pocket. So it's should be no concern because of the financials aren't there. I'm not going to throw away my my home, monies, as it were. So,
okay, well. I won't comment on the property market figures that you suggest there. So the first floor is to be used for storage. Do I get that right?
Yes, it's as per the permission. My intention is to use it as ancillary to the house, and it's to put storage. I have electrical equipment that I'd like under lock and key, and we have Christmas trees, and we have boxes, and like everybody else has. I mean, we don't have a loft at the moment in the main house, so we're utilising it there at the moment. And if planners would have looked through the window, you would have been out of the committee, you'd have seen that's what we've got in there at the moment. And I have nowhere else to put that stuff.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Berman.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions, members? I'm looking for Zoom hands. Councillor Hunt on Zoom, you can, of course, at any time you wish to react with us, raise your Zoom hand, and of course I will come to you in turn. No? Thank you, Mr. Bowman. Right, members. If you have any further questions you wish to address to Mr. Dray, now is the oh, I beg your pardon. I did this last time. I apologise. Ward member, Councillor McKinnon, you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. I don't
And
think
I will
we'll get
assist you
anywhere
in
near that.
timekeeping as I think fit as you talk.
That won't be required. As ward member, I've called this in following conversations with the parish council. I don't think there's much point in me introducing the application because it's already been done. We've already heard from the parish council and the applicants about the issues that are at play. I have not formed an opinion on which way I'm going to vote, and I'm not going to do that now. So I'll just let the proceedings continue with those comments.
Well, that was succinct. Thank you. Are there any questions for the ward member? I have Councillor Woodhams. Oh, no. Oh, sorry. Right, okay. You were very quick with your Zoom hand. No questions. Right. In that case, we are now on to questions for Mr. Dray. Councillor Woodhams.
Yes, thank you. The comment was that the condition 4 is the condition that says the garage and carport shall be used solely for purposes ancillary or incidental to the main house. And what was read out is standard wording that has been applied to other conditions. That's correct. The key thing the condition needs to achieve is to make sure it's not severed from the house. It remains ancillary accommodation or for an incidental purpose like storage. And condition 4 achieves that. That is the standard model condition from government that's been around for many years. The additional elements that are mentioned about creating a separate curtilage, creating a separate dwelling, they're all symptoms that it's no longer ancillary or incidental, basically. So if anything, they provide clarity. It's debatable whether they are necessary, but we've applied them in some cases, and I would have no objection to putting them on. But we're happy with it as it stands. Don't mind either way, basically.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. Just starting with a question to Mr. Dray about that. And also I was looking at proposed condition 6 on restriction on carport alterations. There we have 2-bay carport and a secure garage. I think what I would have some sympathy with, and I'll obviously we'll come to this in debate, but I just would like officers' views on it, is a similar restriction on the garage. What I wouldn't want to see is that garage being converted to residential accommodation and the carport left as it was. It would stick, because that would still be ancillary in my view, but so I'll invite officers' comment on how that condition might be tightened up a little, if that was something that members found to be something they could approve.
Thank you. I think it's important to consider what is necessary. Can you repeat that again? Just the first one.
Well, of course, I live in a house which currently has just had planning permission to remove the restriction that was placed upon it, not being able to convert the garage into residential accommodation. So I know that these conditions have existed in the past.
There are conditions historically, and they're still used when garages are counted towards the parking provision. So the kind of condition you mentioned there is probably an example of that. That's not necessary in this case because of the available parking, irrespective of the garage building. If members feel that it makes a difference to the likelihood that it will remain ancillary and incidental, then I don't think it's an unreasonable thing to consider. And in a way, that's why we do the reason we do the carport ones is also to keep it available for parking as well. But it's not an unreasonable point to consider.
One more on the proposal and then a couple on the technicalities. In the planning history, in the report, the main report pack at page 20, the current permission is in relation to replacement timber carport garage. Now, I've heard what you said about breeze block construction and that being internal, as it were, to the oak frame. But if I take you to the update sheet at page 2, there we have in the approved column right at the bottom of the table under construction oak frame structure, and in the proposed changes, no change specified. Now, I do think that a change is being specified. A change is being specified to allow for breeze block and cavity wall construction. So I just wonder whether or not we just need to reflect that in any of this paperwork.
Can I answer that before we proceed so I don't lose my train? As in my introduction, the internal construction is not normally material to planning, hence, so I wouldn't suggest there's a change for a planning permission point of view, what was on the approved plans. I would say differently if it was listed building consent, because that clearly makes a big difference. But having said that, obviously with that original description, I can see there's the ambiguity. I appreciate that. What we could do is, if members decide to approve it tonight, is include an informative to make it clear that that is the basis on which it's approved.
Thank you, Chairman. Now to the technicalities. Chairman, one thing that I've noticed in this pack, is that we have 3 applications tonight, all of which were called in, and we don't have the reasons for calling. I would think it would be helpful if in the pack, and I know we've had this in the past, the reasons for calling were explained, because it does give you a steer as to the thought process in order, when you're reading the papers, to have a view. I'm not saying that you determine on that, but I think it's helpful.
And I would make the comment that, as you know, Councillor Bridgman, on the call-in form is a box for putting the reasons, and I can certainly say that it was on the second application this evening, was filled in. But perhaps, Mr. Dre, if you could just bear that in mind in future, I'd be grateful. It is a valid point.
Yes, noted, that will happen in future. Thank you.
And now to the most technical of technicals, and I hope members and officers will bear with me. At the last meeting, we considered a Section 73 application. And at the end of the debate, I made a proposal, which I was told by planning officers wasn't a valid reason for refusal on planning grounds. My suggestion, and I'm not saying for a moment that it applies to this application, but I just want to understand from one of our senior planning officers his thoughts on this. I made the proposal that what we were looking at that time, and I'm certainly not saying it is in respect of this case, was not Section 73. It was not a minor variation. And I felt that we could refuse that application purely on the basis that it wasn't minor. I was told, no, you have to have valid planning reasons for refusal. Now, my viewpoint, having thought about that long and hard since, my viewpoint is, once you start talking about recent planning refusals, you are saying this is a valid Section 73. You're saying this is a valid application and we're refusing it for good reason. So I do want officers to reflect on the question as to whether or not it is in the purview of a planning committee to refuse a Section 73 application purely because it isn't minor and should be the subject of a proper and full planning application. I simply say that now, Chairman, because we're dealing with Section 73. I say no more about it, and I'm happy to move to debate.
Right. Well, okay. But as you have raised the point, I'm going to allow Mr. Dre just to come back.
I would hope he would.
I wasn't at last meeting, so I can't comment on the specifics of that. I'm afraid. Obviously, happy to talk to you outside this meeting. I think what you're getting at is there are different ways you can vary a planning permission once you have one in play. You can do it's full of jargon, I'm afraid. There's a non-material amendment, which is a very quick process without any kind of publicity involved, which is meant for truly trivial matters. The second way that government decided you can effect a change is using Section 73, which has existed long before they suggested this, by varying the approved plans condition where one exists. And they call that minor material amendments, just to keep the jargon up. If it is so you can do quite significant changes under section 73 of the approved plans as long as it's fundamentally the same development. If it goes, but there is a barrier. If it fundamentally changes the nature of the development, it's no longer varying the approved plans. It's a different it's a different scheme altogether, basically, in which case we'd normally ask for a new, fresh planning application. So I think that's the issues there. So in this case, content with it being a minor material amendment under section 73.
I think that's a sufficient answer. I'm rather focused very much on this planning application. I'm sure you can take this up with Mr. Dre outside the meeting. You made your point. I understand. Councillor McKinnon, questions for officers.
Thank you, Chairman. Two technical questions for Mr. Dre here. I'd like him to comment on Councillor House's suggestion about the extension to condition 4 that he suggested about the proposed use of the building, and secondly, also Councillor House's point about the section 73 variation being appropriate when the new plans that have been submitted don't reflect what has already been built. He raised some concerns about that process, and I just thought I'd like you to comment on both of those matters, please.
Thank you. I was writing down your second. I missed your first question. Sorry.
It was about the proposed extension or suggested extension 4. To condition 4.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, all the additional matters that were suggested to be added were not creating a separate dwelling, not creating a separate curtilage, not sold, let, leased,
or otherwise separately occupied.
Yeah. So essentially, they're all symptoms, if you like, of a new house being created. If a new house is created, it's no longer ancillary or incidental to the main house. So the key, most important bit of any ancillary condition is what's before you. I've got no objection to adding that. It does. I have seen historical conditions which go even further still, which I would advise against. But the terms that were put to you there, I'm comfortable with. And
yeah, my other question, to simplify, is a section 73 variation appropriate for this situation where the new plans don't reflect what's already been built?
The things I was just mentioning to Councillor Bridgman, on that basis, they are acceptable. The measurements that I read out, the measurements that you've got in the update there for the proposed changes are what's shown and annotated on the plans as well. And that's why we've Councillor House was also correct about condition 2 on the agenda report. We've corrected that in the update, now referring to those plans, so there isn't that duplication.
Okay, thanks, Bob. That's great.
Are you happy with that, Councillor McKay? I think it's a very valid point. I mean, I know we have heard from Mr. Behrman saying he absolutely wouldn't wish to do this, but the planning permission doesn't go to Mr. Behrman, it goes to the property, and who knows if Mr. Behrman moves, what would happen? So I think it's a very valid question, and thank you for raising it. Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. Back to condition 4, I'm afraid, but just for some clarity, and I think from history, something that I recall, noting all the conditions proposed for expansion on condition 4, that an ancillary use could still be something along the lines of a guest room or living quarters of some sort that are still linked to the house. So the perception that somebody was living in there might not actually be as obvious as a separate dwelling as some might consider it to be.
Yeah, thank you. There's a distinction between the words ancillary and incidental in planning law. Ancillary will include living accommodation, an ancillary bedroom or an annex is ancillary. It's like almost like an extension to the house, if you like. Incidental is a parasitic use, so it's something that can't exist on its own, using the legal term. So that's a shed. You wouldn't have a shed without a house. It's storage would be, or a carport would be incidental uses. Despite that distinction in planning law, if you have a garage which is an incidental use, there's nothing to stop you converting it to an ancillary use unless you apply a condition. So this committee has the recent past differentiated different areas where it said incidentals acceptable and ancillaries acceptable, but you'd need to give a clear reason for that in your deliberations.
Thank you.
Happy with that? I see no further hands. I'm looking around as well. Right. Well, I think we have exhausted the question, Mr. Dre, as well as those who have spoken to us. Who's going to start the debate? I see Councillor Bridgman's hand.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I come on to my views, I wouldn't want anything we say tonight to give anyone the impression that it's all right to get planning permission for X and build Y. You heard my questions to the applicant. I feel very strongly that what should have happened here is that there should have been a realisation early on that what they wanted to build wasn't what they got planning permission for, and they should have applied for fresh planning permission or a Section 73 in order to rectify that before they started building. But we are where we are. Personally, I think that the changes actually improve the building. Particularly, I think the half hips make a good change to the design of that building in relation to the main house. It would have looked slightly strange, I think, had it been built with its original form. So I actually welcome that. I don't think that any of the other changes materially affect the development. We've looked at the dimensions. The dimensions are within a hair's whisker of what was granted. The fact that it's left-handed or right-handed and is now the other hand, well, that actually probably makes it look a little less bulky because the carport is pushed out to the side. I fully take on board the comments made by the parish council, and you heard me question the proposed condition 6. I would like to see both condition 4 and condition 6 beefed up, but I'm coming to the view that I in favour of this. I think it's actually an improvement on the design before, but I wait to see what other members think.
Councillor Somner.
Chairman, yeah, I'm very much of the same mind. I'm afraid not much of a debate on that point. I agree with everything that Councillor Bridgman has just said. And I think it is important that people realise that any changes, any rethinks need to go through the appropriate, at least inquiry, if not application. The inquiry would have resolved whether an application was required or not. But I agree. I don't think the structure as it stands is out of keeping. And you know, some of the measurements are less, not more. If it was all more, it would be a different situation for me. With those changes, I would be happy to either propose or second a proposal.
Well, yeah, there is none has been proposed. Are you proposing approval?
I'm happy to propose approval in line with officers with the extensions to the conditions as mentioned.
Does that find a seconder? Councillor Longton. Are there any other hands going? Councillor McKinnon, before I go to the vote.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I was going to have my 2P. Is it still okay to do so before we do
yes,
that?
absolutely.
Yeah, so,
Never fall short in debate, Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you. Yeah, so kind of Councillor Sumner and Bridgman kind of beat me to it with their comments on the desirability of seeking planning permission before going against the approved plan. So there's no point in saying that a third time, although I guess I almost already have. We can see from some of the questions tonight and certainly the parish council's concerns, which I completely understand, is that there's a bit of a concern really about the proposed use. I think that's the underlying tone here, isn't there? That when you look at it's a lovely building, and you see the roof lights along the top, that lovely UV PVC window at the end. You know, it does look a bit housey. I mean, it looks like a nicer house than the one I grew up in. So it's just the concern here that this is a bit of stealthy, let's turn it into a residence is what's there. So, of course, taking Mr. Bairn, of course, at his word that he doesn't want to do that. But as you rightly say, Mr. Chairman, that Mr. Bairn may not live there for forever, and you know, it'll be sold to somebody else. So I think we do need a bit of a robust beefing up, if we can, of condition 4 to make sure that it's not used as a residence or for domestic purposes. And I think I'm probably in agreement with previous comments that the appearance is as good, if not better, than it would have been otherwise. So there we go. 2 2 or 3 minutes to say what had already been said.
Well duplicated, Councillor McKinnon. Before I go to any vote, I'm going to ask Mr. Dray just to clarify in that the proposal, with no disrespect, wasn't specific in the exact wording, suggested wording from Mr. Dray. If you are then in agreement and the seconder, I will then go to the vote. Mr. Dray.
Thank you. Yes, I'd just like to clarify the two conditions just so we're absolutely clear. I think we're all clear on condition 4, really, that they with the no creation of dwelling, no creation of a curtilage, and the lease sold, let separately. I think the 3 extra terms included there. I'm not clear on the proposed changes to condition 6. I know it's Councillor Bridgman originally made the comment, sorry.
Indeed, it was, Chairman. Now, all I've got to do is find condition 6 again in order to. It was all to do with the use of the garage. Now, I heard what you said about right to convert, and because there's, I think we can all agree there's ample parking beyond the building, and we wouldn't be counting the garages of the car. Might be counting the carports in the parking, but I don't think that would be necessary. It's really to do with conversion of the garage section of that into anything other than storage or garaging.
Would ground floor being kept to garage, carporting, or incidental uses such as storage, i.e. not primary living accommodation, but keep the first floor as ancillary, so any ancillary purpose residential? That,
I mean, I would be happy with that, but I'm not the proposer nor the seconder.
Well, sorry, I'm going to seek further clarification. Chairman's privilege. Elsewhere within the parish of Bradfield, a little time ago, there was a carport that was allowed with the restriction that doors should not be fitted. Doors were fitted. They were refused. They went to appeal, and they have to be removed. So, please, would you just confirm and elaborate that doors will not, without precise permission for them to be fitted, be allowed to be fitted to these carports?
Chairman, if I may, I think you'll find that's already in.
It is. I'm seeking just clarification because, to put it bluntly, my reading, and I'm not the lawyer, you are, Councillor Bridgman, or were, but on 4, it does actually say quite clearly not to be used at any time other than for purposes ancillary and or incidental to residential use, which is what we're seeking the clarification on. So wording is important in planning, and I'm just trying to make sure that we get it right.
Chairman, if I may,
yes,
I think that your point, though, is dealt with at 6.
Yes.
Because it does say no physical alteration should be made to the carport.
It does.
Including closing the sides installed doors. So that was my
point taken and made. Sorry, Mr. Dray, we're on the right track. I want to go to the vote, but are there any other points you wish to raise or clarify?
You're correct. Condition 6 would stop doors being put on the carport. Based on what you said, I would suggest you leave that unchanged to serve that purpose, but you might want to amend condition 4 to be more specific on the floors. So we could amend it to say the ground floor shall be used solely for garaging, carport, or purposes incidental to the dwelling, and the first floor shall be kept for ancillary or incidental.
Right. Proposer, are you happy with that?
Chairman, I'm happy with those.
Second, are you happy with that? Sorry, second, are you happy with that? Right. Now, we were, before I go to the vote, going to play with the new electronic system of voting, and I am reliably informed that it is probably not going to work as the way in which we expect it. So I'm going to revert to the old-fashioned means of raising a hand clearly, including Councillor Hunt on Zoom. Oh, no, he can't vote. Sorry, forget what I was about to say, Councillor Hunt. Those in the room in favour of granting permission of this section 73 and approving this application, please show. And that is unanimously approved. Thank you. No, next time. Well said. I mean, if he wishes to, he can raise a hand at any time, Councillor Woodhams, as I did say earlier. We now turn to application item number 2. We have 2 Zoom people to join us. Please may I be informed when they are on Zoom.
It should be in the meeting, Chairman, if they just start the cameras.
Right. Well, I welcome Mr. Mather and Mr. Hudson. Can you both hear us?
Yes, I can.
Excellent.
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Excellent. Right. I will then start this application by asking Mr. Dre to introduce the item 2101358 house, which is Thatcher's in Chapel Row in Bucklebury. Mr. Dre, please introduce the item.
Thank you, Chairman. Just bear with me, I'll get the right slide. Okay. Okay, so this application is for Thatcher's Broad Lane, Chapel Row, a householder application to demolish an existing rear extension, a new single-storey rear extension, a 2-storey side and rear extension, a new garage block with office and games room above, and a single-storey link to the main house. And the application is being called to committee by the ward member, and we are recommending conditional approval. Here you can see Thatcher's on Chapel Row, this just off from the centre of Chapel Row by the Bladebone pub there. Here you can see the site constraints. Chapel Row doesn't have a settlement boundary, so the site is classified as being within the open countryside for the purposes of the council's policies. The AONB also washes over Chapel Row. The green shaded buildings with red outlines are listed buildings, but no concern has been made given the lack of indivisibility between them, and the green dashes are public rights of way. So this is the site plan, and you can see here the proposed rear extensions, the outbuilding, but the linked outbuilding off to the front here is Broad Lane. There's the link. So this little bit in here is 2-storey infill, and then it proceeds out further at single-storey level. And there's also a bay window on this side, which is shown on the other plans. So it's worth noting that it obviously turns, in the link, it turns the corner to follow the rear boundary there with Oakley. That's the existing plans. This is the proposed ground floor plan. So it's worth just noting that here you have the front building line, so that you can gauge how the attached outbuilding comes forward and to what extent there. Roughly where this single-storey link joins the main house is where it's a 2-storey extension, and then you have the single-storey to the rear and the bay window to match that one there. And so as you can see, the single story is not visible here coming out there. So it's just a relatively smaller 2-storey extension there, and then the upper story of the attached outbuilding. So that's the proposed front elevation, and where the line is in the middle here is where it curves round. So that this corner here on the far right comes forward of the front building line. And that's the rear elevation. Again, the line, this time it's signaling that it's obviously going the other way. So you can see the single-storey rear extension, the bay window on the right-hand side, the extra hip for the 2-storey extension. That's the eastern side, so the side with the attached outbuilding. So you can see the 2-storey infill extension, the side of the single-storey rear extension, the link from the house, and then it's also the eastern elevation is the side of the attached outbuilding with the dormer windows and the headroom. Of course, there's no windows in that bit. And that's the other side elevation. It's the western side where it's replicating the bay window, and you've got the side of the single story rear extension. So I'll start with the smallest additions. That's the bay window is going where you see the two green double doors there, essentially replicating the one to the right. And then you all see the single story coming off the side here, which will come out here. And then the two-story bit is in filling this gap here. And then the link and the outbuilding would be down here. So just to remind you again, so that's the infill bit there. This will be going away from you in that image. That's the front of the house. So this is where the link will be coming out, and the garage will be kind of to the right-hand side of this picture. And this is where you see the flat roof there, be where the two-story extension is, and then obviously the rear single-story extension. Again, just to give you some bearings, so that's kind of stood roughly in these parking places, I would say. And that's looking the other way, so that's looking towards Oakley. So that's kind of stood here, looking that way. The link coming across in the garage is the outbuilding essentially here. And that's just further around, looking east. That's the view from the green on Chapel Road. So you can see the main house, so and Oakley, it will be in this gap here. I've just got a few as you move around, just so you can get a sense as you would travel, filling in that, just in that space there. And there too, there's the access, so it's in here. Picture of the centre of Chapel Row. Obviously, appreciate the character of the area. We've marked up this plan following the site visit where we viewed the development from the neighbouring property to give you an idea of its height from that perspective. We've measured 5.48 here to the ridge height of the garage. Set against the existing elevation of the house, you can see it comes to just over this flat roofed bit here. So if you trace that along roughly a third up the slope of that roof. So if you bear that in mind, and then we look at the image from next door from Oakley's front garden, you can see the flat roof there. So the ridge is set a little above that and then coming along this way there. So hopefully that helps picture that better. And then just another image, slightly different angle, just so you can see as you travel. So the main issues as set out in the report are, because we are in the open countryside, the housing in the countryside policies apply. So policy C6, and which looks obviously making sure the design is sensitive in rural locations with a particular focus on subserviency. We don't have any particular significant concerns with the bay window and the rear extensions, single and two-story to the house. I think by our judgment, they're quite clearly subservient and reflect the design of the existing property. The key issue from the consideration of the application has been the scale and the design of the garage and the focus of the objections. The garage will house, it was shown to house a games room, an office, toilet, and it's considered that it's not uncommon. Those uses are not uncommon ancillary uses for outbuildings to have in large detached dwellings in rural settings. The link is obviously somewhat less conventional, but arguably it enhances the ancillary or incidental nature of the extension, because you have year-round access and it's obviously linked to the house. So just that to mean future severance is less likely. The eaves height would match the single-story rear extension. The link part is clearly subservient. The garage and the link will add approximately 106 square metres, which equates to about 54% over what's there now. And with the extensions, that comes to 74%, which is clearly a sizable extension. However, given the spacious plot, we judged that it can accommodate a fairly sizable building without resulting in a harmful ratio between the building and its plot. It's not uncommon for detached buildings in rural areas to have a similar scale garaging. So on that basis, and the height is obviously set down from the main ridge height of the house. So on balance, we judge it to be acceptable in that respect. It is, as we saw in the last photo, visible from a neighbouring property. Given the roof lights are set at a high level, we're not concerned with any significant overlooking, and the roof slopes away from the boundary. And whilst it's visible in the front garden, it is a significant distance from the house, so we don't judge it to be materially harmful to neighbouring living conditions. So on that basis, no other technical considerations have been raised, so it's been recommended for approval. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you, Mr. Dre. Turning to those who are wishing to speak, as of yesterday, the parish council who asked me as ward member to call this in were unable to call for very good reason. They have given me a statement which they have asked me to, their comment, to read out, which I will do in my ward member part. So we do have an objector. We have Mr. Mather on behalf of Mr. Bucknell, who lives in the neighbouring property. Mr. Mather, welcome. You have up to 5 minutes to address us. After that time, please be there to answer any questions members may have. I'm timing you by a stopwatch. Can I assist you with any timekeeping?
I should be okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So as soon as you start talking, I'll start the stopwatch.
Okay, good evening, Chair and councillors. Thank you for inviting me this evening. My name is Edward Mather. I'm an architect at Colony Architects and a friend of Mr. Bucknell, who lives at Oakley next door. He's asked me to speak this evening because, unfortunately, Mr. Bucknell could not attend. He's away with his family at the moment. He did write a letter a few months ago, I think the 15th of July, and I'm really just reiterating the points that he set out in his letter this evening. I'd like to start off by saying that overall, we are supportive of the principle of extending the house and offering a new garage, ancillary or incidental accommodation, as I've announced, to Thatchers. However, for a number of reasons, we just feel that the scale of the proposal represents an overdevelopment on the site and would negatively impact the setting and Mr. Bucknell's property. More specifically, we find the rear extension, the bay, all those parts which are being added, actually quite a positive thing. They remove the modern extension and actually make the house look better. So we're supportive of that. The issue is perhaps the ancillary accommodation to the side and the front. As the officer has set out, the site is in the countryside and the North Wessex AONB. And although house extensions are permitted, they need to, quote, have no adverse impact on setting, the space occupied within plot boundaries, on local rural character, historic interests, or the building and its setting within the wider landscape. The site is positioned at the end of the avenue, which is a very distinctive local landscape feature, central to the unique character of Chapel Row. The site that we're talking about at the moment is to the north of the avenue and faces over the green, and holds a very prominent position and is clearly observable from the public space. Therefore, any proposal should really be carefully designed to not negatively impact, quote, the setting and wider landscape. It should be noted, though, as well, that back in 2005, an application of similar height and scale was refused. It was for a garage, albeit to the west of the property, not to the east as we have today, because of its harmful impact on the AONB and character and setting. So I think for us, it sort of benchmarks what is reasonable. If we look at the proposal today, it protrudes about 3 meters to the front of the property. and is of 2-storey in scale, so it jumps above the hedgerows that screen and line the front of the property. It will be the proudest structure along the avenue in Chapel Row, and as 2 stories would bring, reduce the openness of the setting, and on that basis, we feel it has a negative impact on the setting and the wider landscape. As I said, we're not completely in opposition to this, but I think we would just like it to be brought down a little bit and hopefully, reduce the negative impact. It should also be noted there are a number of roof lights on the property that are on the northern boundary and face onto Oakley. So we have sort of 2 concerns with these really. One is obviously that the roof lights introduce a degree of overlooking, albeit it's sort of implied or actual, depending on how close you get to the roof light, even if they're at a higher level. If you think that there's roof lights on the northern side, we've actually got 3 windows on the southern side. So there's a question as to, well, why do you need 2 aspects of lighting here? There's a small space, 6 windows seems quite excessive. So perhaps we could drop the roof lights. And the other thing is in A and B, we do want a sort of dark skies policy, so the additional light pollution might be a problem. So we also ask for the roof lights to be removed.
1 minute remaining.
I'm just about to summarise, that's fine, thank you. So as I've mentioned before, we welcome a lot of things the application bring, but in summary, we'd just like the height and prominence of the building to be reviewed. We'd ask for the roof lights to be omitted, and if this was to go through, perhaps a bit like the previous application, a very restrictive condition applied to prevent this being a new dwelling, let ancillary accommodation, etc. Anyway, there we go, I'm done. Any questions?
Right, yes, members, any questions for Mr. Mather? I'm looking for Zoom hands. Sorry. Councillor Woodhams, was that? No, it wasn't. No, we're going to let you off lightly then, Mr. Mather. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have no supporters. We have the applicant, Mr. Hudson. Mr. Hudson, welcome. Are you there?
Yes, I am, Chairman.
Good. Again, up to 5 minutes. Can I assist you with any timekeeping?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. And please remain there for any questions after you have spoken. Your time starts now.
Right, hello committee. I'm clearly not a planning expert like Mr. Mather that Mr. Bucknall's decided to appoint. So I will keep my my views very brief, because I think the committee report that's been produced by West Berkshire Council, the planning department, is very thorough in the detail and the interpretation of the policies. I'd just like to sort of pick out a couple of points that Mr. Mather highlighted about the prominence of the structure. It isn't the most, there are buildings within the centre of Chapel Row that are more prominent to the side of the road. And secondly, with regards to the roof lights, they are above eye line. So I've been very careful and considerate in terms of ensuring that Bill and Jane, my neighbours, retain their privacy. That was always something that was incredibly important to my wife and I. So the roof lights are above eye line, and it would prevent any form of overlooking. And really, just to summarise, to say that, as I started off, was to say that I'm not a professional. I don't have much more detail to add, but I think the committee report is thorough in its explanation and its detail. And I do hope the committee vote in favour and support the planning officers.
Very succinct. Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Members, any questions? Councillor Mays.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. I had only one query, which I could have asked the previous speaker, but I was talking or looking at the drawings of the roof lights on the garage block. I was rather surprised that there are 3 and that they're not equally spaced across the width. The one on the right appears to be a wider gap than the 2 on the left.
I would have to speak to the architect about that, but my understanding is that roof lights are positioned to provide light to the rooms and the stairwell in the appropriate positions. But if that's something that is would be contentious, then of course I can take that back to the architect.
Yeah, thank you. It is a minor detail, but it's one that struck me when I was looking at the plans. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? No? Thank you, Mr. Hudson. So now I have to time myself for 5 minutes. And as I said, I'm going to read out verbatim the statement from the parish council they have given me. Councillor Brims attended the site meeting, but unfortunately cannot make the meeting tonight and sends his apologies. The only part of this application that Bucklebury Parish Council objects to is for the double garage with office, toilet and games room above, sited to the east of the property with a single-storey link. This extension will have a considerable impact on the street scene from the road through Chapel Row, the Green, and when driving northwards up Hatch Lane towards the staggered crossroads in Chapel Row. Bucklebury Parish Council does not think this part of the application meets the criteria of subsections 1, 2 or 4 under policy C6. Bucklebury Parish Council does not think the two-storey garage extension looks subservient to the original dwelling. The apex of the roof line is above the gutter level of the existing house and almost doubles the bulk of the north and south elevations. We think the design is not in character with that of the original dwelling, which has hip roofs. This proposed extension is squared. Whilst the plot is large, the total of these extensions will considerably increase the footprint of the dwelling, and we think this part of the application will have a considerable impact on the rural character and the street scene. Bucklebury Parish Council think the garage and rooms above will have a considerable impact on the residents of Oakley, the neighbouring property. Whilst there is no right to a view, the impact to the bulk of this proposed development is considerable on that property. The windows on the rear of the proposed extension, although Velux, will look directly into the property and there will be potential light spill from the windows. Bucklebury Parish Council believes a single-storey double garage with a link and low-angle roof in this setting would be a single-storey would be far more appropriate. This would, in the council's opinion, make the view from the road, the green and neighbouring property not too dissimilar from what it is today. There ends the parish council's written statement that they've asked me to read. I don't always comply with their request for a call-in. I wanted members to assess the impact, as Mr. Mather said, the avenue is special to Bucklebury. It signifies the visit or remembers the visit by Elizabeth I, hence the avenue of trees, and residents of Bucklebury are slightly protective of it. And I just wanted members to assess in their judgment how this sits in that special landscape in this part of Bucklebury. I am neither for nor against. I have declared that I know both the applicant and the neighbour on a level, and I look forward to your judgment and comments to be made. And with that, I will stop. Do you have any questions for me? Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, local knowledge. We've heard differing views on separation distance between what is proposed and the road and other buildings within the vicinity and the road. And I just seek your views on that.
Right. The avenue itself is an eclectic mix of many different styles, big, small, mostly well set back from the road. 2 doors up from Thatcher's towards the Bradfield side. So to the east is a fairly newly built, was a bungalow and a much bigger house, but it is still set back from the road. I believe, I can't speak for Mr. Hudson clearly, but I believe the houses that he is referencing are perhaps those opposite which do come closer to the road. They certainly do. And to the west of Thatcher's and the staggered crossroads, there are certainly properties which are very close to the road. I think what I would hope that members take account, and I thank those 2 who were able to come to the site visit, we looked at it from the green and where we parked, and that is the view, that is the specific part of that part of the avenue that I think this relates to. But Mr. Hudson's point is that there are houses closer to the road indeed. Any other questions for me? Otherwise, questions for officers? I see no hands. Questions for officers, members? Councillor Bridgman, is that an old hand or the new hand?
That's a new hand.
That's a new hand. Very good.
I was looking and I think I found it. It's the separation distance between what would be the rear of the construction if it were constructed and Oakley. I think, is it 29 metres? Because from the site visit, I recall it, that there is a distance between the corner of Oakley and the rear of the proposal. Yeah. 29. That's just the confirmation of what I thought I'd seen it in here, but just in case.
So I was desperately looking for the actual figure. I have read it. It is in the report. It's
6.10.
6.10. Thank you. 6.10, and it says 29 metres from the neighbouring property. Any other questions for officers or Councillor McKinnon?
Thanks, Chairman. Just quick question, maybe with a follow-up for Mr. Dre. When we're assessing the subservience of the extension to the existing building, obviously we've got a figure, I think the highest figure there when you consider everything together as being 74% increase in floor space or floor area. Are we looking at anything up to 100% is considered subservient?
Thank you. The policy says it has to be subservient, and it specifically says that there are no hard and fixed rules. The old suite of policies in the local plan did have supplementary guidance which used to stipulate up to 50, between 50 and 100. That was taken away, so it's because it's more of a judgment call. What's probably best to say, bear with me, I will find the exact quote. Right, in the supporting text to C6, 4.49 says the relationship with the existing dwelling is key. The scale, height and massing of an alteration or extension should appear subservient to the existing dwelling. There are no rules that can be applied to an acceptable size of an extension, as each application has to be considered on its merit on the basis of the impacts of a particular property in that location. But what I would say is there are probably several elements you can look at in terms of design that kind of always go to subserviency. And percentage increase is a fair thing to consider, one indicator, but I wouldn't rely on it solely. Looking at the policy as a whole, it looks at the relationship between the house and its plot. So, the character of the house could be a small house on a large plot, and then if you have large extensions, it changes the nature of that relationship. So, height is obviously a key one. Ridge height, eaves height, width, all the dimensions are clearly going to have a bearing on it compared to what's existing already. Footprint, building line. So all of these kind of factors that you've heard mentioned by myself and the two speakers are all relevant factors that come into that judgment. And I think members just need to weigh them all up.
Thank you. That's helpful. So in a sense, it's a bit of a judgment call with no hard and fast figures, and we need to consider all the things that you said. The follow-up question was, and what I've got in mind is the picture you put up earlier. It was from the front. It was in the front elevation, and it struck me then that even looking at the percentage increase in floor area, that doesn't tell the whole story, and you need to just look at the visual impact from the street scene. So again, if one was minded to be against this application, and I've not made my mind up yet, it's important to say that, on the grounds of the impact from the street scene, or the visual impact in the street scene, is that again a judgment call? Is that's just a case of, in a considered opinion, that is too much of an impact from the front view?
Where development's visible from is obviously going to have a key impact on your considerations. Just because something's hidden doesn't mean it's anything acceptable, but obviously the more prominent or visible something is, that will increase the sensitivity of the area. So yeah, again, it is a relevant consideration in informing that judgment.
All right, thanks, Bob.
I have, yes, Councillor Bridgman.
Yeah, sorry to come back.
No,
to you,
please do.
Two things. One that's been prompted by what Councillor McKinnon just said, but just to ask Mr. Dre's view on the point that Councillor Mays raised with regard to the roof lights. Looking at the plan, I'm looking at the proposed first floor plan. My take on that is that we have 2 rooms and a stairwell, which are of different dimensions, and that the roof lights have been placed effectively in the centre of each of those, which means naturally they are going to have different distances from each other and from the edge, which is how you end up with different distances. I just wanted your view on that. And the other one was on, just to follow up from Councillor McKinnon was saying, obviously, well, on the site visit, the front of the garden facing onto the road is quite well screened by a lot of planting. And we discussed in the last application that, that the fact that planning applications go with the property and properties can be sold. So obviously a lessening impact of the bulk of a building is the amount of screening between it and anyone looking at it. So to what extent is it possible at all to seek to retain deliberately screening in order to screen the bulk? Thank you, Joe.
I think all I can really say in response to your first question is I think you're right. That's probably how it came across. And I probably appreciate the sentiment that results in a more discordant layout of roof lights. But that is a proposal before us. And I can't speak for the person who designed it, but yeah, it does seem to be the reason why. In terms of screening or landscaping, you're right to be cautious. Landscaping is an important consideration and something we should seek to secure in developments where it can have a positive effect. We need to bear in mind the reasonableness and enforceability of any condition. We quite typically apply landscaping conditions with a requirement that for the first 5 years from planting that it's maintained and any dead or dying or plants are replaced with like for like. So that does, and that gives us an assurity that they're likely to establish, but we can't rely on it. It's very rare to have conditions or planning obligations that seek very long-term protection. It does happen on major developments, structural landscaping, but I think we've got to be proportionate to what we can impose on a householder application. And to your very first point, screening is obviously another factor that will come into play.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chairman. The front street scene that we've just been talking about, and I hope you're not going to think I'm a real pain. Can we see the photo where it was very clearly demonstrated what it looks like at the moment? If I recall, I think you can see the rooftops of, is it Oakley? But I just think it would be good if we could see, unfortunately it's disappeared off my screen, which is really handy. Is when you share the screen, everything goes, there we go. And was there another one as well?
Oh, there's 3 photos. Shall I just go through them one by one?
Yes, please, yeah.
So that's almost directly opposite, looking at Thatcher's. You see the roof to the right, can't you, of Oakley?
Yeah.
So it's kind of in here. And we looked at the height above these here for the roof. I'll move on. So just a bit further to the west from the car parking. And then gone back the other way, sorry, so that's a bit further east along the green. So that's the eastern side of Thatcher's there. So it's in here.
Thank you. As obviously a substitute, so I wasn't at the, I didn't know that I needed to be at the site visit. So it's interesting to see that and to think about try to envision what a two-story building in that position might have. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will explain when we discuss site visits at the end of the meeting. But of course, if you know you're a substitute, you're always welcome at a site visit. We have now Councillor Woodhams.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I did actually make a site visit the day before. What a good idea. Thank you. Yes, there we go. Yes, I did actually make a site visit the day before as I was available. And I noticed that to the west, I believe, there's a telephone box and two properties behind a bus lay-by, very, very close to the road. Also, I noticed that across the road was a public house, also very close to the road with a dwelling adjacent as well. So there are properties close to the road. I noticed in the planning balance conclusion that the officers are basically in favour and supporting the development and etc. Story linked to the main house are acceptable and will not be harmful to the character and appearance of this application site. The street scene, the wider locality of Bucklebury, or the rural character of the North Wessex Downs. And having taken into account the relevant policy considerations and material considerations referred to above, it is considered that the development is acceptable and conditional approval is justified. And if it's helpful, I would like to propose officers' recommendation.
Chairman, point of order. Have we moved off questions to officers?
Sorry, why am I flashing green? There we go. No, we have not. We have not entered debate. We're on questions to officers. So I'm going to ask you to. Well, I never foreshorten debate. I never foreshorten the process. We have to be seen to be totally scrupulously fair. And I would just urge you, please, to just be a little more patient with us, Councillor Woodhams. Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to dissipate a little of the pain from Councillor Stewart and ask Mr. Dray to go back to his photographs, please. I would like to see the one from the neighbouring property, Mr. Dray.
One moment. If you want to just reiterate that again, so we calculate it approximately. That's probably the clearest one.
Thank you. My first observation then, and thank you for clarifying that, is that I can see windows. There was a comment earlier on, I believe, about additional or certainly light being provided, but that is windows that I can see there. That is the property that we are talking about on the application. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. The other point for clarification, if you know it, please, is the hedgerow that we see there in front of us, which property that sits with for ownership. Do you have that information, please?
I can't fly that absolutely, I'm afraid, but that's the best information I've got in that respect.
That's fine. Thank you. The reason for my question, Chairman, just for clarity, is an extension of the conversation and the questioning about the hedgerow to the front of the property, because of course it depends who is responsible for managing the hedgerow between the two, and therefore who has potentially control on the height of that hedgerow and how much of a screen it forms between the two properties. But if we don't have that for absolute certainty, then I will make my judgment without it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any still, we're still on questions to officers. Are there any further? In that case, I now turn to debate. Who's going to start the debate? Is that an old hand? Oh, Councillor McKinnon. Is that an old hand, Councillor Woodhams?
It may well be.
It was, I think. I'll let you put it up again. Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks, Chairman. I hope Councillor Woodhams will permit at least some debate on this. So I'll start off. It all boils down, I think, and thanks to Mr. Dray and everyone who's spoken this evening for all their very informative contributions. For me, looking at the impact on the street scene and the wider locality, it was a different photograph that, or it was a plan that Bob put up earlier on. It was the view from the front elevation, and I've searched deep inside myself, but I cannot see how you could consider this not to have an adverse effect on the street scene and the wider locality. I think it is, when you look at it from the front, it is a substantially increased footprint's the wrong word, because you're looking at the whole thing, but just the impact on the visual setting, I think is significant, and certainly obviously keen to hear other contributions, but certainly minded to say, actually, no, this is too big for the reasons that I've just described. But that's where I am at the moment, Mr. Chairman.
Right. Well, thank you for that view. I'm looking for another view. I see Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. I kind of do have the other view. I'm looking at. I mean, it is massive. There's no getting around that. It's huge. But I think it's been accepted that the development to the rear of the property is generally accepted. Not adverse in any way, shape, or form, and this is all about the development to the front. I think it is big. I think, however, there's such a variety, and Councillor Williams quite rightly said, from going along there are properties closer to the road, there are properties further back from the road. It is a mix, and I think I can understand what the applicant is trying to achieve with this. I look at the plot itself, it's quite an unusual wedge shape, and that in itself, I think, always creates its own issues. If your plot shape and the plot size don't go hand in hand, then whatever you try to do it has the potential to cause a problem. And I think what they've tried to do is not lose too much at the back, which I can understand because of the shape of it. And they've got a large area to the front. I am leaning towards going with officers on this, Chairman, at the moment.
Councillor Bridgman, what do you say?
Chairman, thank you. My first thoughts are in relation to the separation distance from Oakley, because we stood on the site visit, we stood in the garden of Oakley and looked across at the existing house and anticipated, because we could, the height of the proposal. It is never nice for a neighbour to have something built within an eye line, but I formed the view that the separation distance was sufficient to minimise that impact on Oakley, and that particularly if, and I would say to the, obviously Oakley, I suspect Oakley have that hedge and can retain that hedge, but certainly if members are minded to agree with officers and give this one planning permission, I would urge the applicant to retain, indeed enhance, the planting at the front of the site bordering the road, because I do think there is a visual impact. I tend to disagree with Councillor McKinnon as to that impact. I form the view that impact is not so great that we should refuse. One thing I would say, however, and this sort of leans on the previous application and takes one of the points made on behalf of the neighbour, it is in relation to the question of garage doors and the design of the front, because what I would not want to see is those garage doors disappear and that garaging converted to accommodation or something akin to it. So I would seek guidance from Mr. Dray, if members are minded to propose and agree the planning application, to ensure that that aspect of the building is retained.
Mr. Dray, can that be accommodated by a form of simple words?
Thank you. Sorry, just make sure I've got the right plan in front of me. Between them, the floor plans and the elevations show the ground floor being used for a garage, cycle store, and workshop. There is a door on it, so the carport condition that we saw on the last application wouldn't apply. But if members consider, but the other condition that we talked about before, the ancillary condition, whether you wanted to specify uses between the ground floor and the first floor, that may be possible. We've got incidental uses on the ground floor shown. Myself, it was games room and home office. So the uses shown on the plans are ancillary uses. You know, they could be in the main house, a games room and home office. So if you were to do a similar condition this time, it would pretty much be verbatim from before of ancillary and or incidental on the first floor, and incidental only on the ground floor.
Are you implying, Councillor Bridgman, that the conditions as proposed in the agenda aren't strong enough? Or?
Yes, Chairman. I mean, the point I'm making is it's referred to by officers actually at 6.8, where it said that the presence of this ancillary building reflects the more spacious character of the dwelling entities, clearly be read as part of the site as a whole rather than a separate unit due to the garage doors installed, which is why I want the garage doors retained in order to continue that viewpoint of ancillary.
Mr. Dre, do you want to comment?
If you consider it necessary to maintain the visual appearance, etc., then it is possible to, it would be legally possible to apply conditions stipulating that the doors remain. Okay. Can I just add to on the,
please do.
To hopefully be helpful, Councillor Bridgman's point about the screening and stuff, and maybe covered off by landscaping condition. If
Councillor Woodhams.
Can you not hear me? I have a view that accords with the officer's report. Thank you.
Well, I'm looking for a proposal.
Well, I'm happy to propose.
Propose what?
Officer's recommendations.
Does that find a seconder?
Chairman, with
the conditions.
With the extra conditions as just discussed.
That's correct.
No, we are getting there. We are getting there. Does that find a seconder?
It does, Chairman.
It does. I am not going to vote on this application. This is down to you. I know both the applicant and the objectors. I'm abstaining. Those in favour of conditional permission, please show.
Chairman,
Stop.
Can I just read it out to be clear?
Please, Mr. Dre, would you read out the proposal and conditions?
Conditional permission as per the agenda, but amending condition 5 so that it's incidental only on the ground floor and ancillary and or incidental on the first floor. I don't know whether the other 3 elements that we discussed before about curtilage, creation of dwelling want to be added. I'll just ask the proposer to confirm those 3. And then finally, the addition of a prior approval landscaping condition, additional condition.
Are you happy with that proposer, Councillor Woodhams?
Happy to accept, Mr. Chairman.
And the seconder?
Have his own.
Right. Those in favour, you understand what you're voting for, please show. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against, please show. 1 against, and I am abstaining. Conditional permission is granted. Thank you. We now move to the last application. Are you happy, ladies and gentlemen, to continue, or do you wish to have a little comfort break of 2 minutes? 2 minutes.
I was just going to say that we were going to allow Councillor Hunt an indicative vote.
Councillor Hunt wishes to speak. He's always very welcome to raise his hand, and I will take him in turn with everybody else. Are you happy with that, Councillor Hunt? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm very happy with that, Mr. Chairman, but it's pointless. So I appreciate the offer, but it doesn't really matter. So I'm happy to shut up and let things carry on.
Well, I'm certainly absolutely not trying to exclude you, please. I mean, if you put your hand up, I will come to you instantly in turn. I promise you faithfully. Do you wish to have a comfort break, ladies and gentlemen, of 2 or 3 minutes max? 2 minutes.